All right, today we're diving into a real historical mystery. We're investigating a civilization that absolutely dominated Italy long before Rome was even a twinkle in the world's eye. These people were masters of art, incredible engineers, but they left behind one of history's most fascinating puzzles. We're talking about the Etruscans. You know, when you picture ancient Italy, your mind probably jumps straight to Rome, right? The legions, the Senate, the Colosseum. But the Romans weren't the first major power on that peninsula, not by a long shot. The answer to who truly ruled first lies with a much more mysterious and, frankly, a much more interesting culture.
And to really get a handle on the Etruscans, you've got to see just how different they were. Think about the Greeks and Romans. We get them. Their art, their philosophy, it all feels kind of familiar. But the Etruscans? They were a whole different story. Their art showed these short, powerful, sturdy figures. And their religion? The Romans described it as gloomy, dark, obsessed with fate and spooky omens. They were this completely foreign presence right in the heart of Italy.
Okay, so this huge difference, that's our first big clue in this whole enigma. Let's dig into what really set the Etruscans apart from everyone around them.
And get this, they didn't even call themselves Etruscans. That was a name given to them by outsiders. In their own language, they were the Ras or Rasenna. And from the way they looked to their unique customs, they were just a total puzzle to their neighbors from day one. But the biggest mystery of all, the real head-scratcher that has had historians stumped for centuries, is their language. I mean, this is the key that could unlock their entire world, but it's a key we still just can't seem to turn. And here's why it's so tough. Etruscan is what linguists call a language isolate. What that means is that it's not related to anything else we know of. It's not related to Latin or Greek or any other language family. It's like a linguistic island standing completely alone in ancient Europe. What's really wild is that the language itself went through this massive transformation. The older version of Etruscan was apparently pretty soft and melodic, but over time it got really harsh and rugged. Vowels started getting dropped, word endings were just chopped off, and the accent got slammed onto the first syllable. You have to wonder if their language got tougher as their world got more dangerous. And you can totally hear this shift when you look at how they adapted foreign names. Just check out this list. The Greek hero Alexandros becomes this mouthful, Elchitzen Tre. Polydeuces gets crunched down to Paltuk. Menelaos becomes just Menlay. Even the goddess Minerva gets shortened to Minerva. It's a perfect example of how rugged and clipped their language became. So, if the language is basically a brick wall, what about their origins? I mean, where on earth did this unique culture actually come from? This question has kicked off one of the longest-running debates in all of history. For centuries, the most popular story, the one told by the famous ancient historian Herodotus, was that the Etruscans were refugees from a place called Lydia, which is in modern-day Turkey. It's this epic tale of a terrible famine, a king who makes his people leave, and this long, dramatic sea voyage to find a new home in Italy. It's a great story, but even way back then, some people weren't buying it. Another historian, Dionysius, pointed out some pretty major holes in the theory. He was like, look, the Lydians and the Etruscans have nothing in common. Not their gods, not their laws, not their customs, and, most importantly, not their language. The whole thing just didn't add up. So why did this wild story stick around for so long if it had so many problems? Well, the most likely answer is actually kind of funny. It was probably just a huge mix-up. A simple case of mistaken identity. Just look at these two names. The Etruscans were known as the Tors Ene. Meanwhile, a group of people way over in Lydia were known as the Toraiboi. It seems like this entire grand theory of an epic sea migration was built on two names that just happen to sound kind of similar. It's a classic, almost comical, historical screw-up. This brings us to a much less romantic, but way more plausible theory. The Etruscans probably didn't arrive by sea at all. They came by land, migrating south over the Alps. And there's pretty good evidence for this, too. A people called the Reti, who lived up in those same mountains, were still speaking a form of Etruscan well into the Roman era. Okay, so while the big mysteries are still up for debate, that doesn't mean we know nothing about them. We actually know a decent amount about the life they built for themselves in Italy, north of the Tiber River. They created this powerful confederation of 12 major city-states, each ruled by its own king. But, and this is key, this was not a unified empire. The League was really loose. The cities were rivals just as often as they were allies, and they were constantly doing their own thing. This fierce independence was a huge part of their culture, but in the end, it was probably their fatal flaw when they finally came up against the unified, disciplined legions of Rome.
Now, you've probably heard of the Tarquins, right? Rome's last royal family. And yes, they were of Etruscan origin, but it's really important to understand this wasn't an Etruscan conquest of Rome. It was more like one powerful, influential family managing to gain control within the Roman system that was already there. The story of the Tarquins is a Roman story, not really an Etruscan one.
And so, even after we look at everything we do know, we kinda end up right back where we started. We come to the very same conclusion that the historian Dionysius reached over 2,000 years ago. The Etruscans are like no other nation. Their isolation, their bizarre language, their mysterious beginnings, it all makes them a permanent and totally fascinating enigma in the ancient world. And that really makes you wonder, doesn't it? The Etruscans are proof that an entire civilization, a major power, can rise, thrive, and then just vanish, leaving behind just enough clues to drive us crazy. It really begs the question, what other lost worlds, what other forgotten stories are still out there, just waiting to be discovered, maybe right beneath our own feet?